Everything Everywhere All at Once has been out for a year and a half now. And when I first saw it months ago, I noticed something. Something that somehow nobody was talking about. Just to be clear, what I have noticed is not directly related to the plot itself. And I'm going to admit, I don't really get the ending of the movie. I think it tries to tackle too many things at the same time. Here are some of the examples. If you want, you can skip this part. It really is just something that I want to hear what are the things. So, with spoiler in mind, the movie starts by introducing the tax problem from Evelyn's laundry business. Then the whole movie went down in another direction when her husband got hijacked by himself from another multiverse. And Evelyn apparently had the ability to punch the big bad guys and potentially save the world. The only problem is, the big bad villain was apparently her daughter. She didn't want to hurt her own daughter even when the grandfather, Gong Gong, from another multiverse told her to do so. So things got so messy that even Gong Gong and his gang, who were there to help, became the enemies. In the midst of all this, the villainous daughter told her mother that she didn't actually want to hurt someone. She just hoped someone would understand her. So with all these unfolding plot lines, the turning points of the movie seems to be the word
to be kind.
Here's where I start to feel unsure about the movie. The way Raymond said, being kind is strategic and necessary, made me feel like he is treating being kind as a tool, separating the means and the end. If that's the case, then at that point, it has nothing to do with kindness. And be kind cannot be the force that salvaged Evelyn's daughter back, because the daughter Joy was having the problem of losing the will to live. She was trying to give up. You don't tell someone who is giving up to be kind. You give them purpose. This is why I think when Evelyn taps into other people's mind, she either got rid of their worries, for example, getting rid of illness, or gave them the fantasy that they desire. She was giving them a taste of meaning in life. Being kind suddenly became this secondary message. Have a meaning in life, even when we are a small speck of dust in the universe, suddenly became the main point. But why suddenly Evelyn had this revelation? Not quite sure. Because the whole movie started to turn from a bad ending to a good one right after the Be Kind speech. And you have other moments like this, where years of trauma and stubbornness could be changed because I magically aligned the word correctly. Just a few words of convincing could change years of habit. By far the quickest change in attitude was the final showdown. Evelyn was convinced to let her daughter go just to hold on to her again, with no specific reason or event other than the fact that she would lose her daughter. Something that she and the audience obviously would have thought of when she let go on the first time. The whole scene felt a bit redundant. And these are some of the thoughts that I have on the ending. Let me know what you think. So back to what this video is actually about. Mental illness. Kind of. And no, I'm not talking about the subtle hint from the movie showing Joy trying to end things. Do you remember how this multiverse story gets started? Raymond started to act weird. He opened the umbrella inside the elevator, something that everyone should notice. It was such a big movement, but Gong Gong in front was not surprised. He might not be good at English, but he is not blind. Not only that, but what was the thing Evelyn said right before she got transported to somewhere else? It's almost like it's understandable to think the whole story is absurd. Now, after the whole elevator experience was settled, look at the instruction that she was told to do. Switch shoes to the wrong feet. Close eyes to imagine you are in the janitor closet. Push the green button. All these instructions are oddly specific, and some are downright weird. Why would you need to switch your shoes to the wrong feet? Why pushing the green button itself cannot trigger another multiverse? This collection of weird behavior are not one-time event. For instance, Waitman needed to eat a lipstick to gain martial arts skill. There was another time he needed to eat gums under the table to defeat enemies. These are oddly specific behavior. If you go on the internet and search for the diagnosis of OCD in DSM-5, you will find out that there are interesting similarities. Something intrusive and unwanted might happen, so the patient needs to neutralize them with some other thought or action. Intrusive things in this case is obviously the enemies. The enemy is the representations of Eveline's troubling thoughts and ideas. She combated with her odd action. And contrary to popular belief, OCD doesn't just mean you want things to be clean and tidy. It could be any repetitive behavior. This kind of behaviors are aimed to reduce your anxiety and stress. And there's this one thing about OCD. Comorbidity is common, meaning that a patient might have multiple illnesses at the same time. And guess what? Schizophrenia is one of the common illnesses. And here are some of the common symptoms for schizophrenia: delusions, hallucinations, and catatonic behavior. I don't think I need to explain why what Eveline experienced looked like delusions and hallucinations. As for catatonic behavior, the word means the patient shows a lack of response, a sense of stiffness to them.
Mrs. Wang! Hello! Look, I'm sure you have a lot on your mind, but I cannot imagine anything mattering more.
Now, need not to say, most of the time when the mental illness patient shows signs of aggression, it's because they want to protect themselves or someone they care. This is also something that aligns with Everything Everywhere All at Once. Eveline was fighting to protect. Most importantly, if you have seen the movie, you would know the daughter, Joy, got another name.
You're just making up sounds.
Jobu Tubaki is the name of the antagonist. She is the Joy that experienced all multiverse and wanted to end all things. But what is the name of Jobu Tubaki? It's neologism, a common symptom for schizophrenic patients, a phenomenon where they make up some new terms or words that is referring to the things that is unspeakable or meaning that cannot be encapsulated by modern words. So now I've told you all this, what is the point? It's not just some fan theory about the whole thing is just a mental psychosis from Eveline's head. I actually want to use this movie to talk about some theoretical concepts. And in order to introduce those concepts, I need to talk about something else first. I still remember when I first watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, the split on the screen when Eveline entered into another universe looked like something I have seen before. And as I thought about this a bit more, I realized I was connecting more and more dots together. First of all, what is Everything Everywhere All at Once? It's about a woman living in a multiverse setting. She tried to fight because she thought there was something from another universe intruding her world. It's also a story where her family is involved. The whole thing was filled with great and entertaining fight scenes. She definitely is a protagonist you don't want to mess with. Now, let me introduce a game to you. Control. What is Control? It's about a woman living in a multiverse setting. She tried to fight because she thought there was something from another universe intruding her world. It's also a story where her family is involved. The fight is great and entertaining. She definitely is a protagonist you don't want to mess with. And the reason why I thought the split screen looked familiar is because in Control they have similar visual effect implying the same thing, some form of alternate self. The similarity don't just end there. For example, they both have something red on them. Okay, that's just a joke. But seriously, they have similar elements. For example, for Eveline, it all started when she saw what was behind the elevator door. The door, the gate, it's a threshold. It's a sign for entering something different, like the subconscious mind. And this will hold true for Jessie Faden, the protagonist of Control. She entered a place called the Oldest House. She got there by going through a door. Now, when was this oldest house being built is unknown, but we know that it was built by the collective belief of human mind. and the oldest house would only appear to those who are looking for it. In this sense, it makes sense that we don't know when the oldest house was built, because we don't know when the human developed conscious mind. And the reason why I would like to talk about control is because of psychoanalysis. I find out a lot of things could be interpreted with psychoanalytic ideas. For example, upon entering the oldest house, Jessie was appointed as the director of Federal Bureau of Control, a secret organization from the government. She was chosen because she got the approval from the board. The board is not your typical boss. They are entities from another dimension, a mysterious being with no true form. We could only see it as this pyramid. The board also has these special abilities. Did you see what just happened? It is able to speak by enunciating 2 or more words at the same time. Sometimes it will even speak with contradictory information. This action itself reminded me a lot about the basis of psychoanalytic theory. When I ask, "Do you love your mother?" you are trapped into answering yes or no. But in reality, it's a complex situation. There are things you like about your mother and things you don't. So, according to psychoanalytic theory, no matter what you answer, yes or no, some part of you are still being repressed. The repressed part will go into your subconscious mind and pop up in your dream. Therefore, the idea of the board being able to speak with multiple answers seems like an interesting concept. There seems to be something here that is worth discovering. It also doesn't help that, in the world of control, you have daily objects that possess special power. These items represent the archetype in the human collective unconscious. It is through our daily rituals, cultures, and urban legends that give these items symbols and imagery. We gave them a psychological significance. For instance, the surface weapon that Jessie was holding had many different appearances. Depends on the historical period and the collective unconscious of that time. The surface weapon could have been a sword instead of a gun. The shape of the surface weapon is heavily influenced by the wielder. So it was hypothesized that the surface weapon might have taken forms from myths like Mjolnir, Excalibur, and Varunastra. So once again, the game Control combines psychoanalytic theory from people like Carl Jung, using words like collective unconscious and archetype to tell a story. It really seems like there's something worth discovering here. You can go through files upon files to discover the hidden story. But as I was going through the story, I recognized a problem. Let me illustrate what I meant. You encounter this screen upon playing the game, and I mentioned how these glass-looking things reminded me of everything everywhere all at once. Well, this is actually an in-game character. You see, she is called Polaris. Just like the board, she is some kind of extra-dimensional creature. She is able to communicate with Jesse Faden. She is the good guy in the story, helping Jesse to cleanse the enemies. So naturally, you would want to discover more about the Polaris. And in an effort to do so, we can look at the company that made this game. The company is called Remedy. It is set in Finland. And in Finland, they had another name for Polaris. It is called the North Nell in Finnic mythologies. The name North Nell makes sense, because it is similar to another name of Polaris, North Star. In Finnic mythology, the North Nell was used to hold the world pillar. The world pillar is Wait. You might be saying, there are too many things going on right now. Too many names. First, it is Polaris. Then, we get the Remedy. And somehow right now we are talking about Finnic mythology. You might be even thinking, yes, the company was set in Finland, but why we must use Finnic mythology to understand the character? Well, that's because mythological reference was littered everywhere in the game. There's this part called Astray Maze, and which is a short intense range. This is not the only game that has a mythological reference. So the control will also like to Therefore, the oldest house is a tree, and Polaris is the root, and the whole thing could be a reference to the book House of Leaf. Do you see what I am getting at? This whole game seems to be so mysterious on the surface. It is supposed to invoke your imagination. But as I was approaching this, I recognized there were a lot of things that could be explained. It's just that you need to know the reference. I'm not trying to say there's literally zero room for interpretation. I have seen some who believe the House of Life reference might not be entirely accurate. It's just that if you are playing this game for the first time and you have some question about the story, the best way to approach it is not to think with your own knowledge. It is better to look at what others have said before, then come up with your own judgment. Because there's simply no way you would know that many references. This also creates another situations where the whole fan community really wants the sequel to come out. Wanting a sequel is usually fine in any other game. Fans just want a sequel to have a closure. But it is unique for this one. Because after so many theories, after so many discourse, it seems that the only way to legitimize them is by having someone, some authority to tell you what actually happened. So, how much creative freedom do you actually have in understanding the story? Your highly plausible analysis could suddenly become meaningless if Remedy chooses to do the unthinkable. This shows a highly different contrast to the story like SCP. SCP was a fictional secretive organization that was invented by the internet. Just like Control, it also has a list of mystery for people to discover. The only difference is, SCP is a collaborative writing project. This means everyone could participate and write something new. A new monster, a new plotline. The way to approach things is different for these two. One has no start and end, while the other has its start and will end if Remedy decide to stop the project. We become an archaeologist trying to unearth the answer because we know there is an answer. The only problem is, it is underneath us. Maybe we would know more if there's a way to reveal the redacted statement. Maybe we should look into the gaming code. Or maybe we should watch all the interviews from Remedy. Player interpretations become secondary in this process. The goal now is to follow the right path, to find the right answer. This line of thinking reminded me a lot about the concern of psychoanalysis. When psychoanalysis was first introduced, it opened up a new door for us to interpret ourselves. The way Freud came up with the idea of the unconscious is fascinating. But then, things became dogmatic. The therapists started to only follow the theory that they have learned. If the patient shows signs that deviate from their theory, they would just get punished, or have their idea being redirected as something else. Everything must come down to the Oedipus complex. If a child is building up a Lego tower, it must have something to do with the phallus. Everything must be related to family or intercourse. The therapist becomes this father figure, restricting the thought of the patient. So psychoanalysis, once a liberating theory that helps us to understand ourselves, suddenly becomes the force that restricts our own understanding. And Control for me is like that. Control is a game which is full of mystery. It gives out invitations for players to interpret. But then you figure out all the ideas were being presented to you in a cryptic manner. And the best interpretation will be made if our therapist, in this case Remedy, tell us the answer. We can go one step further and discuss art in general. Psychoanalytic theory opens a new way for us to create new art. But as time goes on, we have to ask, when art is referencing a theory, is it because the theory is correct, that's why it's being referenced, or the theory itself sounds interesting, so the artwork imitates the theory? I've talked about the shortcoming of Freudian psychoanalysis. But just like what I have said, the game actually referenced Carl Jung, a psychoanalyst who also thought that Freud's theory is too limiting. So it's a bit ironic that in this video, I'm claiming it suffered the same thing as Freud. But then you encounter things like this, which makes you wonder, do the theory actually matters in the game? Here is an in-game document that talks about the id. This is clearly a reference to Freud's theory of the id, the superego, and the ego. This is a theory that is not compatible with Carl Jung's theory, and yet I have seen people who try to analyze the meaning of the id in this game. So is it just referencing for the sake of reference? The word sounds cool, so we use it, but there's no actual meaning behind. The artwork once again tries to fit in. With all this being said, how is it related to everything everywhere all at once? Well, to answer that question, let me first talk about Lovecraft, because they have similar elements. In Lovecraft stories, the character always have to deal with things from another world. Some of the story take place in a dream setting, which is something that psychoanalysts like to discuss. The monsters have this unspeakable quality to it. You cannot pronounce them properly and give them a name. And when characters meet the monster, they always either go insane or hurt themselves. This awfully sounds like a mental breakdown. And there's this one story from Lovecraft, which is called Through the Gate of Silver Key. In that story, the character Randolph Carter found something called the Ultimate Gate. And what is behind that gate sounds like something you have seen. To quote the story, he has still been Randolph Carter, a fixed point in the dimensional seething. Now beyond the ultimate gateway, he realized in the moment of consuming fright that he was not one person, but many persons. There were Carters in settings belong to every known and suspected age of Earth history, and to remoter ages of earthly entity, transcending knowledge, suspicions, and credibility. Some Carters were human, some were not. Some conscious, some mindless. In short, what beyond the ultimate gate sounded like what Evelyn had experienced. And there would be two people who claimed that Through the Silver Key is one of the masterpieces from Lovecraft. Two people who didn't like the ideas of trees. Let's talk about Deleuze and Guattari. For those who don't know, Deleuze is a philosopher, and Guattari is a psychoanalysis/activist. And since there are similarities between these Lovecraft stories and Everything Everywhere All at Once, I thought I could use this opportunity to introduce some of the basic philosophical concepts from Deleuze and Guattari. By no means I'm an expert. A lot of the information that I've gathered was from secondary sources, which is why I'm only going to talk about basic things. It also doesn't help that their books are supposed to be hard to read. It follows a non-linear pathway, imitating what would your writing be like if you had a schizophrenic episode. For instance, you might have heard of, "Is this a pigeon?" or "My mother is a fish." But then you have Deleuze and Guattari saying, "God was a lobster." So yeah, I'm not going to pretend I know everything. Anyway, Deleuze and Guattari had co-written a few works together, notably The Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaux. In those two books, they were trying to tackle the problem of psychoanalysis, the thing that I have discussed on Control. They focus on how to get rid of this restrictive father figure, how to get rid of this master dictating how you should think. So they chose to invent a new way of theorizing the mind. They call it schizoanalysis. The term schizo is obviously taken from the word schizophrenia. And no, they were not trying to glorify mental health problems. It's just that schizophrenic patients seem to exhibit one notable qualities. They exist contradictory ideas in the same body. Their mind can wander in places that you have never thought of. It's beyond boundaries. They also have no centrality to their identity. You cannot clearly define the patient's personality. The constant state of movement of a schizophrenic patient that has no end goal is what captures the attentions of Deleuze and Guattari. And in order to talk about the philosophical concept, let's start by using the word boundaries. Boundaries, what does it sound like? It sounds like territory. And the term territorialization is exactly one of the concepts. The meaning is exactly what it sounds like. By virtue of existing, you will have a territory of your own. But you don't exist in a static form. You will change. You will move. So you break through your territory. This would be the process of deterritorialization. However, deterritorialization always accompanied by reterritorialization, the process in which you mark the land that you have deterritorialized into a structural form. On the surface, it seems like the same thing as think out of the box. You have your own comfort zone, then you break it. You expand your boundaries. But for Deleuze and Guattari, they believe the concept could be applied to a lot of things, not just your social circle or physical land. One example is, when did our front legs become hands? There is a moment and history in time where our own perceptions of our own body changes so much that we give it a different name. And this process of change has no goal, and it will continue to do so. We don't know what our hands will be like million years later. This process of territorial change has a lot to do with production and survival. And in Everything Everywhere All at Once, Evelyn is always breaking its own territory. She deterritorialized just to reterritorialize, forming a new self because of survival reason. It is important to note, when they are using the concept of deterritorializations and reterritorialization, they don't think whenever it happens, it must be a good thing. And in the movie, the Dr. Joy became nihilistic exactly because of the process of deterritorialization and reterritorialization. Deleuze and Guattari just think that it's a phenomenon which is worth examining, kind of like the internet. The social effect is worth analyzing, and should not be put into binary oppositions of just good versus bad. Now, to further develop the idea of territorialization, let's talk about centrality. I said that Deleuze and Guattari didn't like the idea of tree. When I said that, I don't mean the actual tree, but rather a criticism for past philosophers like Plato, someone who always thinks like a tree. For Plato, he believed that things must have an ideal form. The existence of different kinds of chairs resemble what an ideal chair looks like. Everything is just a representation of that ideal model. Deleuze and Guattari said, this is an arborescent way of thinking like a tree. The ideal model is the root, and the closer the branch, the better it is in representing this ideal. Everything has a center point from this way of thinking. Deleuze and Guattari are very much against this notion. They think we should be more like rhizome. Rhizome has no center. It expands everywhere, and every connection is possible. It can be broken off at any point, but it will always start up again. By their own terms, rhizome is an acenter multiplicity. The word multiplicity is another concept from Deleuze and Guattari. It means things that could increase in their magnitude and dimension without changing their nature. To put it simply, what you are looking right now is a rhizome. The internet expands in all different ways with no center. Everybody from their own unique browsing history. Connectivity is everywhere. You can also see this in nature. Deleuze and Guattari used the example of orchid and wasps. The orchid deterritorialized to form an image of a female wasp to attract the male wasps to pollinate. In this process of transformation, the male wasps become part of the sexual reproductive organ of another creature. But technically speaking, it's neither a phallus or a womb. It's a coexistence movement with no center. You can also see this rhizome from a flock of birds flying. There's no leader, no center, and everybody is expanding and migrating to new territory. The spontaneous movement of the bird never caused conjunction, even though they are not that intelligent. Personally, a rhizomatic formation that I can think of involves salmon. Salmon is enriched with isotope nitrogen-15, and as we all know, here it's salmon. They will catch them and take them into the forest. So a new form of relationship, territory, emerged. The salmon flesh provides more than 3/4 of the tree's nitrogen needs. There is no center of command in this whole process, and yet it's a new emergence that supports the whole ecological system. And overall speaking, all the examples that I've given exhibit a common trait. They are all non-hierarchical relationships. This explains a lot, because the aim of schizoanalysis is not what therapists do, but what the patient do to themselves, how they transform themselves without someone with authority interjecting. And they did try to put things into practice. Guattari, being a psychoanalyst, was in charge of the lab-board clinics. In there, the patients and the hospital worker form a non-hierarchical relationship. They make decisions together. Patients are also allowed to work and express their creativity in the clinics. So going back to control and everything everywhere all at once, how are things connected? Just like what I have said, the phantom of control seems to have this endeavor to trace all the cryptic message to form an ideal model that could explain everything. They also rely on some organizations with higher authority, in this case, remedy, to legitimize themselves. And even from a story perspective, we can still see this dynamic. The board is always trying to find the best candidate to take charge of the oldest house. The game is always trying to locate the center of command. In fact, before Jesse became the director of the oldest house, there were 6 other candidates who tried to be the director but ultimately fell. They were not ideal enough. Now going back to everything everywhere all at once, how should we assess the situation? If you ask me, it's obvious that the ability for Evelyn to jump to another multiverse, this action itself already fits the concept. Evelyn would deterritorialize to another universe just to reterritorialize back with something new. And even from the screen, we can tell the machine forms like a web with no center. Every connection is possible with no start or end on the map. And when something got broken off, it would start off again in somewhere new. All this fits the descriptions of a rhizome. On the other hand, I think Raymond from another universe took on the role of the authoritative therapist, a restrictive father figure in her head. Because it is Raymond from another universe who gave Evelyn a device to experience what is beyond the gate. He gave her the language, the foundation to understand herself more. A problem occurred. The one who was supposed to be liberating started to expect and demand certain response. For example, Wayman said he found this Evelyn because he wanted to find the perfect Evelyn. He claimed to help Evelyn to live up to her ultimate potential, but it is exactly this attitude of finding the perfect ideal that forced Joy to be nihilistic. You cannot fight fire with fire, and when Wayman figured out that she was not the Evelyn that he was looking for, he would have no problem giving up on these faulty representations of the ideal.
I need to find the right Evelyn. And this one, it's not the one.
No.
Basically, punishing the patient. He would also restrict Evelyn from forming connections with her other self, going against the multiplicity, the rhizomatic method. Before that, contradiction must bring an end to something.
You fall for the temptations, you invite contradiction, chaos. The clay pot could shatter and you could die.
But contradiction is exactly the key to constant movement, the core of schizoanalysis. In fact, if we recall the plot of the story, when did things become better? The moment Wayman said, "Be kind," but he was Wayman from this universe. The Wayman from the other multiverse died. He stopped interrupting the patients from self-medicating. It is only after his death, Evelyn could truly experience everything with no one pulling her back. Only then she could finally have a mental conversation and confrontations with her daughter Joy. And the most astounding moment in the movie is of course the final showdown. Because, do you see what's happening? She successfully reterritorialized everything, forming connections. She did it without her symptoms. She no longer need to do repetitive or strange actions to confront the thing that stressed her out. She was finally at peace with herself. She understood how to face her problem. She, in the end, acted like a rhizome. No one from higher up telling her what to do. And the most interesting thing about this movie when I was doing research was the character Evelyn originally was designed to have ADHD. This led to the director Daniel Kwan to research more about ADHD. And as he was researching, Daniel recognized he actually got ADHD himself. So by making these artistic pieces, he understood himself more. Remember how I said in the labo clinics, they encourage patients to work and perform artistic expressions. And I said the whole study of schizoanalysis was named after a mental illness. Do you now see the similarities? Now with all that being said, depends on how you see it, you can argue there's one flaw that got ignored. To illustrate that, we can go back to Control. I said that Control has a multiverse setting, because Control actually shared the same universe with previous Remedy titles. And in those titles, we have Max from Max Payne work as an undercover cop, Jack from Quantum Break work on a time machine, Alan from Alan Wake, a writer who lost inspiration from writing. Do you see the commonality here? If not, you will be able to after experiencing the fake ending of Control. Yes, just like Everything Everywhere All at Once, it also has a fake ending. In that Control fake ending, they roll their credit like how you normally would. But then, the writing becomes weird. It felt like gibberish, something that could only be produced by a lunatic, someone who is having a psychosis. Then we found ourselves in the office. You look at the wall and you realize what you have to do is to deliver mail, tidy up the coffee table, scan the form. This is the moment you realize, oh yeah, I'm actually working. Jesse Faden was assigned to be the director of a bureau. The oldest house is the oldest office. Matter of fact, everybody was working. Max was a cop, Jack is working on an experiment, Alan Wake is a writer. But when you are playing the game, you almost forget the job is part of the initial premise. And this would be the same with Everything Everywhere All at Once. The whole movie, 90% of the time, was showing the office. The characters were inside a workplace, just like Jesse. Even when they are not in the IRS, for example in their house, they were still in the workplace, because it was right next to her laundry business. Their home and the work became indistinguishable. The notions of work is so prevalent that, even in her psychosis, Evelyn was working 90% of the time. Seriously, only on few occasions her other self is not working, and whenever she acquires a new skill to help her combat, it will always be her working on another job. It's almost suggesting to acquire a new skill, an essential skill in modern day, means it must be job related. You cannot derive it from a hobby or personal interest. Even in our art creations, it reflects the norm of modern reality. Remember how I summarized the movie in the beginning? I said this whole thing started because of a tax problem, something related to business. If that's the case, is it really so surprising to see Evelyn's psychosis featuring job-related imagery? And yet, did the film actually address it? No. Everything was boiled down to a family issue. Somehow, if family is fine, then production would be fine. This was exactly what Deleuze and Guattari was writing against. They don't want everything to be boiled down to sex and family. There should be more liberating way to see the world. Above all, it's a work that talks about society and production, that actually wants you to put their theory into practice. So it's frustrating to see the initial premise being swept under the rug. It's almost the end now. I only have a few more words to say. I didn't know where should I put this, and to avoid making this video too long, I chose to cut this part down. One of the reasons why Deleuze and Guattari want us to stop thinking like a tree is because it constantly forces us to ask, what is this? But instead of asking what is this, maybe we should ask, what can it do? There were a lot of videos that I have seen saying, what is the googly eyes? How it is the antithesis of the bagel. But we should remind ourselves, what can the googly eye do? So what can it do? It can make us laugh.
Michelle, sing a song for her.
Did you just call me Michelle?
By the way, you say Michelle, she says yo. Michelle, yo. Michelle, yo.
So that's the end of the video. I have nothing important to say, other than a fun fact. Apparently, Lacan once said, the topology that can represent neurosis is a torus. What is a torus? It's a bagel. This has nothing to do with the video really. Lacan and D plus G theory don't actually match up, but I just find these to be interesting. So don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Bye.